Okay, so Katie and I looked at the Montreal Protocol, which in simple terms is just a global agreement to protect the stratospheric ozone layer by phasing out the production and consumption of ozone-depleting substances. Now, to phase out just means to reduce the amount of ozone-depleting substances, either by stopping the production or the importing of these substances in order to reduce their concentrations in the atmosphere. The law was finalized on September 16th, 1987, and it falls under what is known as the Vienna Convention, which is an international agreement that governs treaties between countries. By 1988, many countries had joined the protocol. As you can see in the chart here, all the blue countries are those that joined it. And as of today, all member countries of the United Nations have signed off on the protocol, making it one of the United Nations' first treaties to be signed by all of their member nations. In 1991, an addition to the protocol was added called the Multilateral Fund. And what this does is essentially encourages wealthier, more developed nations to help fund developing nations' efforts to reduce or phase out ozone-depleting substances in their countries. Okay, so a little more specifics about the law. It regulates 96 chemicals that are considered ozone-depleting substances, and the protocol also details different timetables that developed versus developing countries must follow if they're part of this treaty. And the timetables are essentially deadlines for when developing versus developed countries need to have certain ozone-depleting substances reduced by and how much they need to be reduced by. So even though developed versus developing countries have different deadlines, they have equal responsibilities, and they all have binding, time-targeted, and measurable commitments. And the reason they have different deadlines is because many developing countries can't reduce ozone-depleting substances as effectively and as quickly as developed countries can. So here's a look at one of the timetables from the treaty. You can see the different deadlines for developing versus developed countries. Developing countries have further out deadlines. They have more time to reduce their ozone-depleting substances. And then if you look, you can see some of the worst ozone-depleting substances that are mainly targeted by the treaty. So chlorofluorocarbons, or CFCs, are some of the worst ozone-depleting substances, and those are heavily targeted by the Montreal Protocol. Now, one way that the protocol actually helps target or reduce ozone-depleting substances is by targeting different industrial sectors that employ the use of these substances. So, for example, the cooling industry uses a lot of CFCs because the CFCs help with essentially freezers. CFCs get pumped through tube or like coils and freezers, and they reduce the heat and then freeze the tube, so it helps actually freeze things. So in the cooling industry, alternatives to CFCs were proposed and ended up being used in order to reduce the amount of CFCs being used.
So what sparked discussion of this international agreement? Well, one of the main reasons the Montreal Protocol was created was because in around 1985, scientists discovered a hole, or more like a thinning layer of ozone above Antarctica. And this was particularly bad because this thinning ozone layer allowed more excess UVB and UVC rays to reach the surface of the Earth, which is harmful to many forms of life. And the main cause of this thinning of the ozone layer was ozone-depleting substances, especially chlorofluorocarbons. And when these CFCs meet another molecule of oxygen, it can break up and destroy the ozone. And a lot of these CFCs, they come from refrigerators and air conditioners. The fact that the cooling industry is so polluting brought a lot of attention to the harm that can come from things like the refrigerators due to the CFCs. All right. So some of the controversies of this. So as CFCs were to be banned with the introduction of the Montreal Protocol, a replacement was needed in order to allow for the production of items which previously used the CFCs. And HFCs were actually recommended to replace the CFCs, but they were actually later found to be a potent greenhouse gas. So didn't really solve the issue, but just kind of pushed it on to another issue from the thinning ozone to global warming instead. Another controversy with the Montreal Protocol was some groups believed that that an official ban of CFCs would only lead to more illegal trade of CFCs, so like kind of um, inspiring more trade in the black market rather than just regularly by banning them. But despite both of these controversies, it's still widely regarded as the most successful environmental treaty of all time to date. Okay. So this graph, it depicts the ozone depleting substance consumption globally. It measures 6 different substances, including the CFCs in blue. A stark decrease in the use of ozone depleting substances can be seen between 1989 and 1990, where there's a very sharp drop, and the total phasing out of CFCs can be seen by a little bit past 2005. Overall, the production of ozone depleting substances has dramatically decreased due to the Montreal Protocol, nearly to zero. All right. The impacts of the Montreal Protocol were highly significant. They greatly limited the further degradation of the ozone layer. And it is also projected that without CFC use, the global temperature will not rise an additional half to a full degree Fahrenheit by 2100. Overall, decreasing the impacts of global warming as well as aiding in the repair of the ozone layer. And these are our works cited. The end.